Welcome to the second Translation Across Discipline Conference at Brown University. My name is Jane Sokolowski, and I'm the director of Brown Center for Language Studies. We managed to pull off the first Translation Across Disciplines Conference in February 2022. No, February 2020, the leap year. 2 weeks later, the university closed. So 4 years and a pandemic in between, we're back here, and I'm super excited to have met the people who've already presented, the people who've come from far, the people from our Brown faculty and graduate students and undergraduates who are here. It's really excited that we've expanded the focus is still translation across discipline, but we've expanded the number of disciplines represented. So we have the modern languages, we have anthropology, linguistics, English, where's Matthew? English, we have Native and Indigenous studies, as well as representatives from computer science and literary arts. We have people from firms like Google and Apple. We have people from the publishing world. So we contemplate in these next 2 days all permutations of translation in the broadest sense. So we have translation that relates to scholarly and literary translation. We have multilingualism. We have technology in translation, AI in translation, publishing, and social justice, which is what started us off this afternoon. I'm grateful that Brown's 14th provost and professor of engineering, Frank Doyle, will be joining us and will offer welcome remarks. This will be followed by Steen Ann, a 2020 graduate of Brown University's MFA in Literary Arts program and a recent winner of the National Endowment of the Arts Literature Translation Fellowship. Congratulations. And she will be introducing our keynote speaker, the author and translator, Anton Her. Before we continue, though, I want to publicly acknowledge the organizing committee, Jeremy Lennon, Michelle Quay, Stephanie Ravillon, Sawako Nakayasu, somewhere, right there, okay. Thank you very much for all of your inspiration and suggestions in bringing together such a wonderful list of panelists. It really was helpful to have your input for people who come from Brown, but also people who've come from afar. I'd also like to thank the CLS language ambassadors and other undergraduates who will be helping us throughout the conference. Tomorrow at lunchtime between 12 and 1, I always like to include students in these events. And so we have 15 poster presentations from both graduate students and undergraduates, which will be on display next door in Sales Hall for the entirety of the day tomorrow. But from 12 to 1, the students will be there and can answer any questions, and they really hope that you come and look at their poster presentations. I'd also like to thank Media Services, who I tell you, they're so patient and so diligent with people. We've had several meetings just so I get all my answers answered. I'd also like to thank the departments, centers, institutes, and programs who helped us financially and who also offered words of encouragement for this project. Additionally, I have colleagues at the Center for Language Studies, Jill Stewart, Catherine Kang, and Elsa Belmont-Flores, who've put up with me for a while, and they've really helped me. And last but certainly not least, and definitely deserving a round of applause, the Center for Language Studies Center Manager Kirsty Dane, a genius at logistics and Excel spreadsheets, and who has enjoyed reading most of the translations that we will be discussing in these 2 days. So Kirsty, thank you very much. So through the course of these 2 days, we will be represented by many languages, but we can always add more to our conference. And I hope that the undergraduates here in the audience, but also those who are chiming or watching via Zoom, understand the importance of learning a language while they are in college, because where else can you get consistent 3, 4, or 5 days of language over 15 weeks, and then meet really fun professors who can give you an excellent recommendation because you're in a class which has 20 or few people, and that's a really great environment. So undergraduates, when March comes and it's time to sign up for classes, please make sure you have one about languages in your shopping cart. Finally, this is as I said, the second translation conference we've held at Brown. The first one was an idea of Kevin McLaughlin, who's here now as the director of the John Nicholas Brown Center for Advanced Study, which is getting off the ground this year, and we're excited to see where that leads us. And that was once again back in the leap year 2020. What's today's date? February 29. If anyone saw the New York Times heading, like a leap year was meant so that we could have parties. Did anyone see that? I got a New York Times notification this morning. I had to laugh. Maybe they just sent it to me. So anyhow, leap year 2028. I hope we will see each other in 4 years. I hope this is becoming a tradition. The Translation Across Discipline Conference brings a lot of people together, and I'm very happy that you're here. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Frank. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And your incredible dedication and hard work and planning in your team, as you noted, is clear. It's manifest in the marvelous program, the audience you've assembled here. It's terrific. So welcome, everyone. It's a distinct honor to be able to be here this afternoon to help kick off the 2024 Translation Across Disciplines Conference. Really remarkable. I hadn't fully appreciated the history of and talk about right before the gates closed, February 2020. Many of us have memories of that time frame. As Jane mentioned, Frank Doyle, I'm the 14th provost here. I'm a professor of engineering, a biomedical engineer by training, so I'm a little further afield from things here, although we use AI in my work, so I'm really intrigued to see the way you're bringing that into the conversation. And Jane, if you'll allow me to amplify, you made an advert to the undergrads. I'm going to say to the graduate students out there as well, not too late to pick up a class. I picked up German when I was a PhD student just for the heck of it and wound up doing a sabbatical in Germany some years later, so take advantage. So I think, as you all know, probably far better than me, translation is not merely a discipline, but an interdiscipline, a truly cross-disciplinary scholarship field. And I think that nature of collaboration really invites opportunities for doing activities that are intrinsically inclusive, involve information sharing, and really draw from the wide array of disciplines. I won't repeat what Jane said, but I'll simply say that if I have my tally right, there are 17 different departments represented here from Brown at the conference. I don't know, and maybe I'm looking at Kevin, maybe you've had some events that do wider than that. I've never participated in an event that drew that broad array, that diverse array of scholarship together under one theme like this. Truly remarkable. Here at Brown, as my colleagues know, we have a commitment, we have a plan to really expand the impact of our research, grow our research program, and that by definition requires cross-disciplinary efforts. It's not going to be done in the silo of a handful of programs, but really by harnessing the power of transcending boundaries and doing that. And I think translation in all its form is not only going to be a key partner in that, but also a home to creating its own opportunities to nucleate cross-disciplinary activities. So in the program today, you'll be exploring opportunities for the way translation is being used in society today through a multitude of lenses, whether it's artistic endeavors, social justice, artificial intelligence, pedagogy, industry, digital humanities, multilingualism, and technology. Really a true broad array. The presenters here will aim to provide a deeper understanding of how translation works to bridge different languages and cultures and the dynamics of power and capital that shape how translations are produced, disseminated, and received. I'm particularly excited about the fact that you've brought machine learning and AI kind of into the mix here. As I noted, I kind of use that as a tool in my own work here. Some really compelling questions that you're going to be able to look at, that interplay of human translation with computer translation. How are these new technologies going to be incorporated in the work that all of you are working on here? I think we all know full well that AI-powered solutions can very efficiently produce vast amounts of translated text. But the ability to capture context, the nuances that the human intended in conveying that information are going to be a challenge to try to capture through computer modes. And they really lack the cultural sensitivity that humans bring to the work as well. I can't help but point out, as I think I had shared, Jane, when we talked a while ago, that this field, this intersection with AI and translation is creating all kinds of new challenges Just in the last week or so, there was a report about the fact that some languages, think Gaelic, say that as an Irishman, or Zulu, have such a sort of paucity of data informing the databases that ChatGPT and tools like that are trained on, that the capabilities of using a tool like that, particularly in translation, are highly limited. And some researchers showed that you effectively can create a Trojan horse to defeat the security measures in tools like ChatGPT and ask questions and get answers you shouldn't be getting answers to because you posed it in a quote-unquote obscure language that doesn't have a deep database. So the questions, the dilemmas that we're going to be grappling with are manifold. So just in summary to say, I really recognize that translators are essential agents in the flow of art, media, research, policy, and commerce. Your work is paramount and incredibly important to truly every discipline on this campus. So once again, thrilled at the broad representation we have here from Brown. So I wish you a very wonderful, very stimulating conference full of lots of information exchange and stimulating discussion. And I was going to invite Jane, but I guess I should invite Steen to come up to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome. My name is Steen Ann. I'm a translator, poet, performer, and a proud graduate of the MFA program in Literary Arts here at Brown University. It's especially meaningful to be here with you all today because I attended the conference back in February 2020, as Jane mentioned. As a graduate student who had just been introduced to literary translation, that experience changed my life, or rather, what changed my life was meeting literary translators and getting to know and learn what remarkable people they are. And today, it's a true delight and honor to introduce someone who has changed my life, our keynote speaker, Anton Her. But first, I'd like to read a brief statement alongside the many translators who are participating in the conference this weekend. We are here today to discuss the intricacies of translation across disciplines, literatures, and increasingly armed borders. But as we gather on the Brown University campus, built within the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Indian tribe and named after a family whose wealth derived in part from the triangle trade, the state of Israel continues to commit acts of genocide against Palestinian civilians in Gaza with the political, military, and financial backing of the U.S. government. Today, we stand in solidarity with the Brown students who have organized to protest the occupation and devastation of Palestine, including the dozen who recently ended their hunger strike and those that are still facing charges of trespassing. We urge Brown University to follow in the footsteps of institutions like the University of Michigan and UC Davis, and to, in the words of Brown University students, do its part to promote an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and lasting peace in all of Palestine by completely divesting its endowment from companies enabling and profiting from Israel's genocide. Thank you. Now, I will introduce our keynote speaker. Anton Her. Anton Her is an author and translator whose award-winning, beloved, best-selling translations have introduced Korean literature to new readers across the globe. Born in Stockholm, Anton grew up internationally in British Hong Kong, Ethiopia, and Thailand, but mostly in Korea. And he currently resides in Seoul. He holds a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Korea University, a Bachelor of Arts in French from Korea National Open University, and a master's degree in English literature from Seoul National University. I could tell you all about what a prolific and versatile writer and translator Anton is, that he has translated over 15 books across genres, forms, and disciplines, including speculative and historical fiction, poetry, memoir, and poetics, that he was shortlisted and double longlisted for the 2022 International Booker Prize for his translations of Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung and Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park, and shortlisted for the National Book Award in 2023 for Cursed Bunny. You may have already known all that, and you also probably know that his debut novel in English, Toward Eternity, A contemplation on the future of humanity, nanotherapy, and love is forthcoming this summer from Harper Via. And that is a viral translation of Lee Sung-bok's Aphorisms on Poetics, Indeterminate Inflorescence, was longlisted for the National Book Critics Circle 2023 Barrios Book and Translation Prize. He has also penned multiple influential essays on the politics and work of literary translation, including one of my favorites, The Emerging Literary Translator Valley of Death, Mythical English Reader, and The Great White Canceling, all with his signature wry panache. He's also a co-founding member of the illustrious translators collective Smoking Tigers. Anton is a star and an icon, so what can I tell you about him that you don't already know? Well, to me, Anton is someone who lives by example as a translator, an artist, and a human. He taught me not to wait for permission from received norms or the ways things are or have always been, to live your life as who you are, to be seen, and to translate and create the literature you want to read and share with the world. He is someone who is, along with many translators in this very room, changing the field of literary translation. Who gets to translate, what gets translated, how, and for whom. I had the pleasure to learn with Anton at the British Centre for Literary Translation Summer School this past July. He reminded us to be bold and anything but boring, and to never shy away from what makes us unique on the page. And he taught us the importance of being a reader first and foremost, that the best translators among us are, at the end of the day, a reader's reader, that we don't translate for institutions, but for ourselves and all readers and lovers of literature. In his Korean essay collection, No One Told Me Not To, published by Across Books last year, that chronicles his path as an unapologetically queer and Korean literary translator, he introduces the idea that you don't have to become a flower by waiting for someone to call you a flower, that you can bloom as a flower even when there's no one there to call you one. I've always been the type of person who needs to be seen by others or given permission, but Anton has inspired me to cultivate the courage to bloom, to recognize yourself as a flower. I feel incredibly lucky to exist and translate in the world alongside the flower that is Anton Her. Their bloom is so brilliant and fabulous that just by being in their presence, you might suddenly realize, I can bloom like that too. And last but not least, Anton is the Sailor Moon of translation. So I'll finish introducing him with this: fighting evil by moonlight, translating literature by daylight, never running from a real fight. He is the one named Anton Her. He will never turn his back on a friend. They are always there to defend. They are the translator on whom we depend. He is the one called Anton Her. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Anton Her.
Oh, I'm gonna cry. Thank you, Steen. I know I have some title that I gave because they asked me to give, but then what I ended up writing was completely different. So I hope you will bear with me. This speech will not have anything to do with rereading. Okay, thank you, Dr. Jane Sokolowski and the Center for Language Studies here at Brown University. Thank you, Steen Ann. Thank you to all of my friends and colleagues attending here. Thank you also as well attending here, as well as my sworn enemies, Daisy Rockwell and Bruna Dantas Lobato, who robbed me of my awards. Daisy's like, and don't you forget it. I have actually lost a lot of awards that I've been nominated for. I've lost the National Book Award, the Dublin Literary Award, the Firecracker Award for Independent Fiction, and the International Booker Prize, which my husband says I technically lost twice because I was double longlisted. And I'm the first translator in history to have lost the National Book Critics Circle Barrios Prize twice as well. That's 7 different nominations for 4 different books by 4 different authors. I am sure at this point, some of my authors are thinking, maybe the problem is Anton. Maybe he's just not very good. Does anyone have Deborah Smith's number? I thought a lot about literary awards these past few years because I keep losing them. If I ever won an award, I would probably not think about them at all. My first literary translation was published mere weeks after Han Kang and Deborah Smith won the Booker Prize for The Vegetarian. But back then, the possibility of making a career in literary translation at all was so remote that this win might as well have happened on another planet. I was preoccupied with other things. For example, there was a lot of racism in literary publishing, even, or perhaps especially, among literary translators. This was very strange to me, because intuitively, this should not be the case. First of all, literature is about opening up worlds, not closing them. It's about exploring other perspectives and living other lives and inhabiting other interiorities. But I soon learned it was naive of me to think that all literary people would share this belief. Sorry. To myself, while literature is all about embracing the other, to a lot of people in publishing, it seems to be the opposite. They seem to use literature as a bulwark against the other, their English as a tool for colonization, exploitation, and the enforcing of white supremacist norms around what constitutes proper English, or what gets to be called literature with a capital L. What does this have to do with awards? Everything. An award can break open institutionalized power or perpetuate it. Obviously, awards are problematic, and we all hate awards, except possibly my mortal enemies, Daisy and Bruna, who actually won them. But when books like Gitanjali Sri's Tomb of Sand or Stenio Gardel's The Words That Remain win, it isn't like some book of European divorce literature written by a middle-aged cisgender man and translated by a white Cambridge graduate winning. Those are not the same thing. Books that win prizes should dazzle and astonish us, of course, but they should also change the way we view literature itself. They shouldn't add one more brick to the wall of language and literature policing. Book awards should break the status quo, not perpetuate it. Which is great advice if you're judging an award, but what about the rest of us? What are translators supposed to do in the face of incredible prejudice from the industry, from critics, and from readers? Because again, in 2018, when I published my first book translation, and yes, it was a mere 6 years ago, I was not thinking of winning awards. I already knew that I had no control over how readers read and critics critiqued and award juries awarded. I love Korean literature, but there are plenty of readers in the Anglosphere who would take one look at the cover of a book at a bookstore and not even pick up the book because they see an Asian name. This isn't just readers, this is editors as well. There are editors out there who have never in their lives acquired a book written by a non-white person. This creates a chicken and the egg problem where editors are too chicken to give anti-racism a chance, and readers remain unhatched and unborn eggs because this metaphor has to go somewhere. There are so many statistics that illustrate this, but my grim favorite remains the one found by Richard Gene So in his book, Redlining Culture, A Data History of Racial Inequality and Post-War Fiction, where he tallied the number of novelists being published by Random House by race in the years between 1950 and 2000. In the graph, which basically flatlines at 0 for Black authors during those 5 decades, there is a tiny, tiny blip of a rise in the number of Black novelists being published in the 70s, and apparently this was because Random House happened to have hired a Black editor during that time, some chick named Toni Morrison. But what about funding? Doesn't Korea give lots and lots of funding for translated literature? The propaganda around Korean funding has been so successful that I have heard so-called colleagues say things like Korean translators don't deserve pen funding because we have our own national funding, or that editors will choose to publish a Korean work over a non-Korean one because of said funding, as if that really happens. As if that's a scenario that even makes sense. The people who say these things have an extremely distorted view of the publishing landscape because Korean translators punch way, way above our weight. We publish maybe 10 Korean books in English translation a year, although that number has finally started to grow since last year. These 10 books just seems like more than that because a few of them have gone on to become internationally successful. Almond, Dollar Good Department Store, Whale, Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookstore, and yes, Cursed Bunny. These are all very recent successes, all but one representing a new generation of Korean translators who are willing to pitch and promote as hard as they are willing to translate, which is a type of translator that really began with my generation. The translators who debuted before me tend to be given work and are used to people like agents pitching for them. And by the way, most of the books I'm translating now do not even get Korean funding. I did not get funding for I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki. I did not get funding for Blood of the Old Kings by Sung-il Kim coming out this October from Tor Books. I did not get funding for Indeterminate Inflorescence by Lee Sung-bok. Indeterminate Inflorescence was actually rejected twice by LTI Korea for sample grant funding. This is being recorded and broadcast, right? Because I want to rub that in every time that I mention this book. And I know the quality of the translation was not the issue, because that book got me my second Barrios Prize nomination and is now its American publisher's biggest selling book ever, and has just been given an offer to be published by the largest literary press in the UK. It wasn't until 2016, when The Vegetarian won the Booker, that Korean literature began making an impact in the literary world, and that book, to my knowledge, didn't even receive LTI funding. A previous version by another translator was funded, but not the Deborah Smith version that was eventually published. That was in brackets. Something like 80 million people on Earth speak Korean, and we have a literary tradition going back thousands of years, but all of Korea had only one New York Times bestseller at the time, which was Please Look After Mom by Kyung-suk Shin, translated by Chiyoung Kim. This is a fact that I went as far as to confirm with a staff member of the New York Times Book Review. Indeed, Please Look After Mom's record would not be broken until last year, when Beyond the Story, 10-year record of BTS, debuted at #1 on the NYT list, which, by the way, also received 0 funding from Korea. I know this because I was the translator who negotiated our pay for the English translation team, and it's doubtful that book would have received funding anyway, because of snobbery. In actual fact, and not some weird fantasy projection of fact, Korean literary translation funding has decreased so much that Korean translators are now being paid half of what we were being paid in 2010 when I won my first grant, counting for inflation. This means we are making half the money we used to be making, money that wasn't that high to begin with, but working even harder to earn it, because again, Korean translators are now actively pitching work to publishers and promoting the work once the books are published. We are doing more than just translating. I have said time and time again that my job as a, quote, literary translator, unquote, is just 30% of my job at best, and 70% of it is emails and meetings. These grants don't pay you for that 70%. What job in the world doesn't pay for 70% of the work? This one. But Korean translators still have to hear about Korean funding getting all the credit for the success of Korean literature and translation. It's the funding, these bitter non-Korean translators say, completely disregarding the fact that maybe Korean translators are just better than you are. Or our national funding body goes to Frankfurt Book Fair every year, and I asked one of the workers if they were going to pitch any of my books. They told me that no, they don't pitch rights at Frankfurt Book Fair. They essentially just go every year to remind the book world that the funding body exists. For this institution, their most important concern, as far as I can see, is in perpetuating and promoting themselves, and funding literary translation is a secondary priority. Their self-propaganda has been so successful that now I have to hear my so-called colleagues giving credit to them for all of the miraculous work that Korean translators do. But at the end of the day, there are only so many other things in this industry. There are just only so many things that I cannot do or control. Like, I can't control who Random House hires. I can't force my book down the throats of readers who are racist, no matter how important and good, or hell, even entertaining the book is. I can't game bestseller lists. I can't fix racist review bombings on Goodreads, and I can't force prize juries to nominate or award me. I can do everything right, but due to factors completely out of my control, I can still fail. When my first book translation was published, a book by Kyung-suk Shin, who is a Man Asia Literary Award winner and New York Times bestselling author, by the way, the publisher tweeted about a dog book that they were putting out on the same day and gave our book nothing. I was flabbergasted. You couldn't even tweet about your own damn book you're publishing? Is your PR person being paid per tweet? These are the kinds of things that I can't control. This is where the mental gymnastics come in. There are so many things that I can't control, but if I begin thinking about them, I would never get anything done. So I have to focus on what I can control. What I can control is what I translate and how I translate. What I can't control... Sorry. What I can control is what I translate and how I translate. What I can control is to create a translation that's as close to how I see fit the translation should feel like in the target language, no matter what anyone else thought. I'm not saying we should all pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, a metaphor that I do not understand to this day and I'm too lazy to look up. What I'm saying is there are a lot of things we cannot control, but there are also a lot of things we can control, and I find that most of the time in almost any professional situation, there are things that you can still do to make an endeavor worthwhile. And I have found that focusing on the latter is indeed much more worthwhile. Because the thing is, there is so much bullshit in publishing. There are so many things I'm told to care about that for the life of me, I cannot begin to care about to this day. For example, awards. Of course I care about awards, but only if it has anything to do with me, quite frankly, because otherwise, A, it's a crapshoot, and B, decisions are pretty much arbitrary. And believe me, I've been to the sausage factory many times. I'm currently on the jury for the Dublin Literary Awards, and I don't know what I would have done without my fantastic jury, because it is bewildering trying to determine who gets shortlisted and who gets to win. It's an honor just to be nominated, the cliche goes, but it's not just an honor, it's a goddamn miracle. And I can't hang my self-esteem and my worth as a translator on a miracle. The whole point of miracles is that you can't count on them to happen. And yet, I was talking to an incredibly talented translator friend who has a book in this year's Booker eligibility period, and they asked me if nominees were ever told in advance, and if so, how much time were they given? I honestly was astonished that someone this talented, this successful, this awe-inspiring even cared about awards. For example, my author Bora Chung hates awards. She hates them so much that when we got longlisted for the National Book Award last year, I don't think I even congratulated her. It was only when we became finalists when I messaged her from Taiwan where I was vacationing saying, "Congratulations, Bora, you are now a transatlantic finalist like our Booker bestie, Jon Foster." We now have to stop mutually ignoring it and start talking about plane tickets and hotels. I could hear her deep sigh all the way in Taipei from Pohang. Her reply was, "Do I still have to do this world writer cosplay? I thought we were done." Bora Chung, ladies and gentlemen, an icon. And that's the answer, really. The point of translating books isn't to win awards or make bestseller lists or be published in the Paris Review, a magazine co-founded by a CIA agent. The point of translating books is to be iconic. If you've never been nominated for a Booker, but you keep putting out books that strangers on the internet rave about, congratulations, that's actually iconic. It's like being Susan Lucci, she of the notoriously low batting average in daytime Emmys. We all know who Susan Lucci is, but who the hell knows who won the last daytime Emmy? The fact that so many readers care about your work means that your work will last longer and move more people than a lot of Pulitzer Prize winners. How many times have we seen a book be awarded and then both said book and author forgotten in a few years' time? And how many of us know an author whose new work we would pick up immediately when we saw it in a bookstore, who has never won an award or ever been nominated? Which is more iconic? Which would you rather be? I'm not saying winning awards is automatically non-iconic, but it's not automatically iconic either. Bora Chung was not a best-selling author before she was published in English. She did not come up through the Dingdan system, which is the Korean literary licensing system that determines your legitimacy as an author. Because she wrote speculative fiction, a vibrant but marginalized genre in Korean literature, no one took her seriously as an author. She was published by a one-man presses in Korea until I came along and sold her to a two-man press. Bora had no literary ambitions, and as far as I can tell, she still has none. Her only concern then as now is to create work that is uniquely hers and also go to protests. I had no idea how many protests were going on in Korea until I followed Bora on social media. Labor issues, the Anti-Discrimination Act, justice for Sewol, justice for Itaewon, the wheelchair users bringing Seoul Metro to a halt to protest accessibility in public transportation. She's been in all of them. I stumbled into 2 Palestinian solidarity protests while we were in New York for the National Book Awards last year, and she was so mad at me that I went without her. The second time I ever met her in person was during Seoul Pride, when she ran up to me and my husband and waved at us and then ran off to rejoin her section of the parade. She's not gay. My husband asked, "Who was that? She had such great energy." No, she has iconic energy. Back to the National Book Awards last year. All of the finalists were contacted by last year's nominee Alejandro Varela, asking us if we would make a collective statement on stage calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. I took a short moment to think about it. My parents, who raised me in 6 different countries on 4 different continents, ingrained upon me to never criticize a country I'm a visitor in, because that's just bad manners. Also, what if we get arrested, deported, and blacklisted? I have an American novel to promote next summer. Toward Eternity is available this July from Harper Via. Pre-order now. Bora has 2 more books under contract with Algonquin. I make it sound much more dramatic than it actually was. I immediately said yes, because who cares about your manners when children are being bombed? And I knew Bora would say yes, that pinko commie. A translator colleague of mine got fired for her pro-Palestine stance from her teaching job at a New York college right before we arrived in America for a US tour. And one of the award sponsors, having caught wind of our upcoming collective action, pulled their sponsorship of the ceremony. Kudos to the National Book Foundation for making a public statement in support of free speech ahead of the ceremony, and also kudos to Jeremy Tiang for his introductory speech to the translated literature category during the gala, where he also spoke out against what was going on in plain sight of anyone who owned a smartphone. Iconic behavior. Nobody outside of the group of finalists knew exactly what was going to happen that evening. We didn't tell our editors or publishers or agents. Right before the final category, Best Novel, was announced, and we were supposed to go up on stage for the reading of the joint statement, I turned to our Algonquin editor at the Hachette table and said, Maddie, I just want to tell you now that if Bora and I get arrested tonight, you have to contact the Korean consulate, okay? She gave me a look that I will never forget because it looked exactly like the frowning with one eyebrow raised emoji. She said, what's going on? The Korean consulate, Maddie, I repeated, and when Justin Torres, the winner, gave us the signal, Bora Chung and I got up from our table and walked onto the stage. I remember thinking, if I do get arrested for this, that would be iconic. Obviously, we weren't arrested that night, but I did get to shake LeVar Burton's hand. I said, I've been a fan for 30 years, and I could hear Bora say, me too. And LeVar kind of didn't hear me or just ignored me and shook the hand of the next person. Now that's iconic. In terms of focusing on the things you can control, I just want to leave you with one more story. In 2019, when I was translating Bora Chung's short story titled The Embodiment, which would be the second story in her debut English translation, Cursed Bunny, it was really important that I do it justice because I was going to use it for grant applications. I really needed a Penheim grant because the grant LTI Korea gave us was so minuscule that it could never cover the cost of translating the book, and our publisher did not have the funds to pay me at all outside of grants. The stakes were high, and it was important to get the translation right. I hated feeling this desperate, hated putting my fate into the hands of others like this. This was an untranslated author, virtually unknown in her home country as she was marginalized into the hinterlands of genre fiction, and I was just some nobody working out of a rent-controlled apartment in Seoul. So how could I ever hope to win her a pen grant? I was not a white translator. I was, and am not, American or British, and I did not live in the imperial core. But I care about the book too much to not try. So I translated the story, and of course, and at some point, something completely magical and transformative happened that I can scarcely describe it. I suddenly became possessed by the spirit of the story. The words began to sing off the page, and I can see every phenome, every letter just glowing in my mind. And by the time I put down the finishing touches, I knew that I was experiencing something incredible, something that not everyone gets to experience even once in their lives. And it suddenly did not matter if this book did not win a pen grant, did not manage to get published, and did not get read by anyone, because I got to have this incredible experience where, to paraphrase Mariah Carey's description of her experience of writing her song Fly Like a Bird, the hand of God touched my hand and touched my translation. No one can ever take that moment away from me. And as lovely as everything that has happened with that book after that moment, it wasn't that book, but that moment that really turned me into the translator that I am today. If I am worth anything as a translator, it's not because I keep failing to win awards or because my book made some interminably long and boring best of list at NPR, or because some institution gave me a little bit of power because I played by their rules. My worth as a translator exists because I fucking nailed it with that translation. It really changed the center of gravity in the grid space. I submitted The Embodiment to Granta magazine where it was rejected. And my reaction was, wow, I've seen some of the shit you guys put out, And there's no way you guys have eyeballs because you wouldn't have rejected the story. I was invited to submit more by the same author, so I submitted the entirety of Cursed Bunny, and they rejected every single story. Do you know what that made me think? It made me think that Granta is trash. I know there is no accounting for taste, and I know saying this will probably mean I will never be published by them now. But, good. Let's stop wasting each other's time. I want to be published by people who get it. And if you don't get it, you don't get it. You're not the center of gravity here. I am. I still enjoy being feted by institutions. Award ceremonies are really fun, even if you don't win, because you get to hang out with people and pretend to be a tuxedo-wearing adult. In every award ceremony I've attended, I've never been nervous. I've only felt glee, because here I am, a deeply unserious middle-aged man who translated a book that features a talking head inside a toilet. And I'm shaking hands with my new bestie, LeVar Burton. When she was shortlisted for the Booker, I distinctly remember Bora Chung, who taught and translates Polish literature, saying, "Wait, I'm on the same shortlist as Olga Tokarczuk?" To this day, Bora and I feel like two kids who got away with an elaborate prank. We love our work, to be sure, but neither of us had any expectation that we would be rewarded like this for it. So everything that happened to us is a blessing and a miracle. And that's not an attitude you can have if you're the kind of person who does everything you're supposed to, who admires institutionalized power instead of openly mocking it like Bora does. If you're the kind of person who works with the expectation that if they continue to please the expectation, the institution would eventually reward them, you will turn bitter and petty when that doesn't happen. And you will go on to disparage the successes of other translators as being undeserved. I have seen this time and again. If you're iconic, you're not fazed by lack of recognition. The recognition that comes into your gravity well is earned, and the recognition that doesn't is out of sight, out of mind. Ever since I was a child, all I cared about was being able to make a living off of writing books someday. And I promised myself I wouldn't care if I wasn't rich or famous or what adults thought of as successful. That if I could have that, everything else would be extra. I was very young when I thought this, like 6 or 7. I am 42 now. And having accomplished what my childhood self set out to do, I think I can safely say at this point that the 6-year-old me was exactly right. So boys and girls and NBs of America, you don't have to win awards. You don't even have to be successful. Fail, that's fine. But don't be basic. Be iconic. Thank you. I'm not a super academic person, although for some reason Steen listed all of the degrees that I got. I am an enthusiastic but somewhat mediocre student. So it is a great, great honor to be talking at a school that never would have accepted me as an undergrad or grad. Any questions? I'm supposed to take questions, apparently. Could be about anything at all.
Is this working? Yes. Thank you for your talk. Thank you so much for your words. I wanted to ask, I recently read Counterweight, which is a work of speculative or science fiction that you translated. I really enjoyed reading it. I wanted to ask about your approach to translating speculative fiction specifically because it's so culturally specific, how we see the future, and how do you translate that into another culture and just these ideas of how do we create a collective future between different languages and cultures.
Yes, thank you for that. God, translating the book was so hard for exactly those reasons. So this is a science fiction book that was written in Korean, but it's set in a fictional island near-ish Indonesia. And the way that Duna wrote that book, like I can say whatever I want because I don't think they're going to hire me to translate them ever again. The way that Duna wrote that book is what we call 불친절해 in Korean, like impolite. And that means that they don't really explain anything. And so if you read that book in Korean, it's like they don't really explain the world in full. And like, I had to do so much glossing. This is something that translators, stealth glossing in particular. So what this means is that because the Anglosphere apparently hates footnotes, we can't use footnotes to explain things. We have to like put descriptive words around the word that we are trying to improve upon and gloss. And this is a method that was described by, I believe, Jason Grunbaum first, and then Susan Bernofsky popularized it. And I had to do a lot of that throughout the editorial process. Like, the editor kept asking me, like, what is this in the Korean? And I'm like, there's nothing in the Korean. It doesn't exist in the Korean. And like, I had to like draw like an entire like diagram of the elevator, space elevator structure, because like, and there was this one very, very like difficult part where like every time that I got it, that I handed in the manuscript for edits, because like there's several rounds of edits when you work with a publisher like Knopf Pantheon. They were like, there's this one part where they're going up the space elevator and time is sped up, and because you're on some kind of weird drug, and the planets that are stars are moving slower than the stars of the firmament. And I was like, no, that can't be right. But I translated it, but I was like, okay, I don't want to bother doing the science for this, so I'm just going to say exactly what Duna said on the page. And then the editor, the copy editor too, they were all like, huh? Like, what is this? And then so I would lie in bed and I would think about like, Mars is closer than Alpha Centauri, but would it be moving faster if they're moving in the same direction? Like, and I would get motion sickness. And I think at some point I was like, okay, I'm just gonna give up. But we still did all like that. I gave up, but we still had to do a lot of glossing for that book. So glossing was the answer. But the people still complain about, like, if you read reviews of that book, people still complain about like, this wasn't like, this wasn't clear, this wasn't explained, this moved too fast. And I'm like, I don't know. It's like there's only so much that I can gloss, and without like breaking down the structure of the like, because if you read it in Korean, it like the non-gendered pronouns like make it even worse, because you don't know if the narrator is a man until like the number one thing that I kept being asked was, what race is this man? Like, what does he look like? And it's never clearly explained what he looks like. There is a slight part where it goes like, where he's genetically modified so that he looks like he's from the Philippines or something. And I was like, and he was like, oh, this wasn't a big change. And I was like, oh, so I guess he's Southeast Asian. But then his name is Mac. And then I kept thinking of that guy who sang Return of the Mac. So I was like, is it that guy? Like, that was just the person that I kept thinking of as I translated. So yeah, it was a lot of work. So I feel like, I hope people enjoy Counterweight, and I had fun translating it, and I think it's a good book. But yeah, I am aware of people saying like, oh, this is a little, but glossing is what we do. Yeah.
Hi, that was iconic. Thank you. So, one, you would definitely be accepted at Brown. Just saying. But since we are at Brown, I want to talk to you about another Brunonian, Ocean Wong, and your translation of his Night Sky with Exit Wounds. So specifically translating poetry, translating from English into Korean. There was a lot of firsts for you. So I'm just curious to hear about that experience.
Yeah, so I translated Night Sky Exit Wounds into Korean for Munji Publishing. I believe this was the first time I was ever asked to translate something. And so it was like being cast in a movie that I did not audition for. Like, I cannot overemphasize how amazing it is when you sell a book. Like, it is my favorite part of the translation process. I'm sorry that I'm this crass, but it is. Like, when I sell a book, I'm like, I sold a book. Like, I have to translate it, but I'm like, I sold a book. Like, that's for me, like, the best. But when someone sells it for you and just gives it to you like that, I was like, and it was Ocean Vuong. And so for me, there were several things. Like, after I got the email, I was like, I got it late at night and it was from Munzi. And I'm like, oh God, like, are they gonna take back the rights for something? And then I'm looking at it and it's, oh my God, it's a book offer. And then I told my husband, it's Ocean Vuong. My husband is Thai American. So for him to have a poet like Ocean Vuong, you know, who is Vietnamese American, a Southeast Asian American, like it's very important for him. So he's like, oh my God, Ocean Vuong, we're gonna be best friends with Ocean Vuong. So I got to translate my best friend, Ocean Vuong. And his poetry, I don't know how you guys feel, but his poetry, like he makes a lot of effort to be understood. I'm not saying his poetry is easy, but he's a very generous poet. And so translating it actually was not a very difficult process for me. The fun thing was, like, I got to work with, the editor that I got to work with was this novelist named Pak Sorme. And she's really, really great. And she was like, oh, I've never edited a poetry collection before. So she was like obsessive about like each word because she was just so like, oh, I'm a novelist and I've never edited poetry before. And I was like, oh, calm down, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. So I actually had a lot of fun. I think it's also, so Korea invented movable metal type. So we are a print culture powerhouse, superpower in the world, which means the book came out like December 9th or something. And then I got another round of edits at the end of November. And I'm like, the book is coming out in 2 weeks. And they're like, oh, just get it in by December 2nd and you'll be fine. Which the translators are laughing. Because if you've been through the publishing process in the Anglosphere, it takes like 2 years, like maybe like a year and a half on average. Like if it comes out in a year, that's like warp speed. So that was also like a fun aspect of it. I was like, I thought I was done, but okay, yeah. So I never got to meet Ocean Vuong. I emailed him. I don't think he wrote back. And then I'm friends with Emily Jung Min Yoon, who is friends with him. And I was like, hey, Emily, I want to be besties. And then so she connected us, and then he sent me a lovely, lovely email. But like he was moving from like one school to like Massachusetts to NYU the summer I was here, so we couldn't meet up. But yeah, someday we will. Yeah, my best friend and I will meet. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk, which was like the therapy I didn't know I needed, plus all the tea and all the things. So truly thank you for bringing that.
Grant has trash. Thank you.
That alone. And you're just joking about the hopes of becoming besties with someone you translated, but obviously you have a deep relationship with those that you have translated in the past. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about translating living authors, as someone who translates a lot of non-living authors, how you do it, how much you allow them into your workspace, and if it depends on the person, the project, just anything you want to say about that relationship.
Sure. J.D. Pluker talked a little bit about this in this presentation about like how it's sometimes like a marriage, and sometimes you get divorced. So I feel like my philosophy is to never talk to my authors. And so there are authors that I have never talked to this day. Not because we don't have a good relationship, but because it's a form of deference on both sides. Like the author does not want to 부담주다. They don't want me to feel pressured, and I don't want them to feel like I'm watching them and scrutinizing them and whatever, because I really don't care about their reading of their own work. I only care about my reading of their work. And that's always been my policy. And that I don't ask them for approval. I don't ask them to clarify things. If I don't understand something, I will guess. And you know, I'm mostly right. And even if you do ask your author, like they don't remember. They're like, I don't know. Like Bora is notorious for this. So Bora Chung and I became friends because like like I would be like liking her protests on Twitter and like Instagram. And like we would send each other like cat memes. Like we'd never talk about literature. She has a PhD in Slavic literature, and she was like, Anton, this is your work, and so you can do whatever you want with it. Like you like create a new character, put it in there, like do whatever you want. And I was like, but, and then she goes, I have a PhD in literature. Like there's nothing you can say that will convince me that your work is my work. Like I am thoroughly postmodern. Like go wild. So we never talk about literature. It was so funny because like Damien Searles, legendary translator, like he and I and Bora were having lunch one day. We were in New York, and they were talking about like something about some literary theorist. And I was like looking at Bora and going like, oh my God, it's so weird to see her mouth open and like hear all this literary theory coming out of it. Because while we talk almost every day online, like we never talk about literature. So that was like a really funny moment for me. Because she's really wacky. But she's like really the exception. Like I've never talked to Hwang Seok-young. I've never talked to Baek Se-hee until like this year. And we sold like 1 million books together. And with her, I know that she really loves Roxane Gay. And I was at the Strand in New York, and I found like a signed copy of her latest book, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna send it to her. And I had to like really worry about it because I'm like, oh, would she feel like would she feel like creeped out that I'm sending her a gift? So I asked her agent. I was like, I'll send it to you, and can you give it to Baek Se-hee? And then the agent was like, oh, you can send it to her. Here's her address. Okay. So I sent it to her, and she posted it on her Instagram, and she was so nice about it. And yeah, but I tend not to really talk to my living authors. Like there are some authors that I really don't want to talk to. Like, do I want to talk to Hwang Seok-young? No. Do I want to talk to like who else? Like Duna, for example, like they are completely anonymous and they like hide their faces, and like I don't want to infringe on their whatever. And the other thing is like sometimes writers kind of misunderstand us as like language secretaries. I won't name who did that to me, but whenever that happens, I'm like, do I go through the bother of educating this person, or do I just not translate them ever again? And yeah, so it's a whole thing. So, but to put it in a nutshell, I am basically anti-talking to my authors, and Bora Chung is just like a really, really big exception. Anyone else? No.
I feel bad because this is the third time I'm bringing up The Prisoner by Hwang Seok-young today. But I really, really enjoyed it.
We love Hwang Seok-young. We love everybody.
But yeah, I really loved reading that book for my thesis. And I actually had a question regarding your translation process in different genres and different types of texts. Would you say that there are any differences in your translation process regarding voice or style, or just like a general thought process when translating fictional texts / novels in comparison to like translating memoirs or more nonfiction texts?
For me, it's every author that's different, not genre. So every author is like, one big thing is some authors need no intervention and some authors need intervention a lot. And not because they're bad authors, but because they rely on certain Koreanisms that just don't translate very well in English. So who's a good example of that? Like, for example, when you translate Kyung-suk Shin, Please Look After Mom, I'm very, very careful to follow exactly what she's doing. Like if she doesn't use quotation marks, I don't use quotation marks. If she doesn't use line breaks, I don't use line breaks. Sometimes whenever I would change something, somewhere down the line, I would come up to a problem and I'd be like, oh, that's why she did it that way. And so I would just change everything back. And when I first started translating her, I've done 3 books by her now. When I first started translating her, when I did that a couple of times, like in the beginning, I was like, okay, clearly she knows what she's doing, and I just have to follow her. Other authors like Duna's Counterweight, so Korean authors are very lazy, and Korean readers are very diligent. So Korean readers go to the author. English readers are very lazy, and English writers are very diligent. So the writer goes to the reader. So if you're translating lazy Korean writers for lazy English readers, the gap that you have to traverse as a English to Korean to English translator is vast. That's why there's so many more English to Korean translators than there are Korean to English, like exponentially. And that's really important. Like I had this idea, I'm sorry, this isn't really answering your question, but I had this idea that a translator is kind of like a predator in an ecosystem because you need them, but there's so few of them. And just having one more predator in the ecosystem changes the dynamic of the entire ecosystem. And authors are herbivores that we eat. But yeah, there's so many writers. I mean, sorry, but there's so many of you. But translators are very, very few. So genre, no. But voice, yes. Voice, I have to really think about. And it's really funny because I translate a poet, Kimon, who sounds kind of similar, whether he writes prose or poetry. And so I've never really felt the distinction between genre. Genre is just marketing. Genre is like gender, it's just marketing. So Chanel has their own nose. It's called Laneige, the perfume maker. And then they asked him, in Deluxe by Dana Thomas, she asked him, what's the difference between male perfume and female perfume? And he goes, it's marketing. So yeah, gender is marketing. Yeah. And so is genre. They kind of sound the same, right? Gender, genre. Yeah. Another question?
I don't know if this is kind of a super basic question, but how do I get better at translating? How do I kill it like you do? Because I feel I take all these classes and they're so much literary theorists, and I find them really interesting. But whenever I sit down and I actually have to do the translation, I just can't connect it, and I'm I don't know what I'm doing. So is there a specific way to train yourself at getting better, or is it just you just keep going at it until you find?
Wow, I love it that people think I have my shit together. To be asked questions like this. Because I didn't say this, but someone said translation is you fail all the time and you can never succeed. It's a never-ending failure to put something into words. Was it Halberstam? Someone said this, yeah. That translation is basically the art of failure. So getting an education is really, really important. I benefited a lot from having a very, very canonical, very, very theory-heavy education at Seoul National University Graduate School. But the education scaffolding exists so that you can recognize what you have done. And so you have to, the doing of it doesn't really come into the doing of it. Which means when I translate, I don't do it consciously. For me, it's a subconscious act. For me, it's listening to what my brain is saying. And if I'm educated enough, then I can identify what my brain has said as not a brain fart, but an actual thing that has literary value. Or I would be I'd be sensitive enough and be oh, why did I say that in that way? Does that mean anything? It could mean nothing, but then does that mean anything? So, and that's why artists are so sensitive, because they have to be able to hear what they're, and then you have to do whatever it takes to hear yourself. For some people, they have to go to cafes because they like the ambient noise. You can go to YouTube and cafe noise and have it for 16 hours or whatever. Sorry. But you kind of have to trick your subconscious and get out of your own way and listen to what your subconscious is translating. And then your education comes in, your learning that you're doing now comes in, where you're like, oh, this is crap, but this is very good. Like that's where the distinction, like, yeah, that's where it becomes useful. So I suggest that you figure out how to get out of your own way. Unless it's like doing drugs, which, and that's why there are so many alcoholic artists and whatever, because in order to get out of their own way, like they have to like murder their own conscious so that they can produce the kind of work that they want to produce. But I don't think that's like a super healthy way to exist. I think there must be some other way that you can do that. Therapy, I don't know. Yeah, but that's kind of like part of your journey as an artist.
Thank you.
Are there any
do
more
drugs.
questions?
Hi, thank you so much. And just wanted to ask a question. So I know, like, since you're both a writer and a translator, I just wanted to know, I guess, how do you approach either separately or differently? I know you mentioned, sometimes when you're translating, you kind of embody the story as you're writing it. Also, it's very subconscious. So I guess wondering, how does your process change translating someone else's work and just a version of your own, as Bora Chung mentioned, versus creating your own art?
Oh my God, writing is so much easier. Like, if you run into a problem, you can just make shit up. I love it. It's so like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Huh? Oh, it's so great. Like, also being a writer is so much easier than being a translator. Because when you're a translator, it's like, is this part of my job? I guess it is. No one else is doing it. And if I don't do it, then this book is not going to get made. So I guess I'll do it. In writing, when you're an author, you're like, no, this is my agent's job. No, this is my publicist's job. This is my editor's job. It's so great. And I just sold rights to another book, to my novel. And then they're like, my agent is like, hey, look at this offer we got from X country. And then I look at it, I'm like, they're giving me this money for doing nothing? Like, it's such a great feeling. It's so fantastic. Like, wow, writers have it so easy, so easy. The process itself is very similar, actually, because I translate from my subconscious. And so the way that I wrote my book was I did it by hand because I didn't want electronic distraction. And I did it on the subway on the way to my office. I have an office for translation. And so I did it on the subway on the way to my office for translation. And so because of there's like the rhythmic ambient noise of the subway, it kind of helped me like not think about stuff and to just like write down what came to my mind. And then it just like the novel basically just like fell out of me. Like it went through a lot of edits by the editor. But yeah, it was just so easy that I was like, is this book worth anything? Because it just came so easy to me. It wasn't like translating a book at all, where it's just so much work. And I feel like this is a sentiment that's shared by a lot of Korean authors, because in Korea, there's a very strong tradition of translator authors. Like, it's not a big deal at all. It's just so common. But in America, if you have someone like Bruna Dantas Lovato, who is an author and a translator, like, it's like, oh, you're a freak. And yeah. Sorry, Bruna. She has a National Book Award. I can say whatever I want about her. She can cry herself to sleep with her award.
I think the time is up. Thank you very much. This iconic
Thank you so much.
translator has visited us. We're really happy to have you.